Greetings, our Zoom family. This is my husband, Herb Lee, and
Greetings.
I'm Sharon Lee. You're supposed to wait for me to introduce you
Oh,
before
I'm
you say
sorry.
greetings. That's okay.
Okay, all right.
But this is a fun time for us. It's a fun time, a sad time. It's a time. It's coming from many angles. But tonight, I'm going to hold with a few of my friends a virtual roundtable called Justice for All. And Herbie and I are just going to introduce it before everybody zoom in, before everybody come on. And tonight I'm going to have Joe Ludwig. He's actually my husband's old boss, right? For a
Yes.
short period of time, he was your boss. And I'm going to have my pastor here in Villa Rica, Pastor Harry Pitts. Howie Murphy, he's a teacher from upstate Pennsylvania. He's an art teacher. Jimmy Rickert. And Jimmy, I love him because he's my son's age. He was my son's friend, and I love to hear his perspective from that generation. And also Carla Cruel. Carla is my I call her my baby cousin. I have to call her this before she actually comes on, but she's an attorney in Eastern Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And Carla was also running for council in Philadelphia. So her perspective on justice for all is very important to us too. But I just wanted to start off before everybody comes in, and I wanted to ask you, Herbie, your perspective on racism and what you think about justice for all. How do you see this whole thing, Herbie?
Well, the first thing is we can't say that these things have escaped God in what he sees
Right.
because he addresses everything. There's nothing that we encounter that he does not address in the scriptures.
Right, exactly.
I mean, when you look at uh, injustice and slavery and all these kind of things, well, these things were happening before time, before we came along.
Right, right.
I mean,
right.
when you think of the
So
Hebrew
it's
slave,
basically nothing new under the sun.
nothing new under the
Okay,
sun,
right, okay.
nothing new under the sun. And he instructs us uh, in quite a few things concerning this.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, he says, pray without ceasing.
Right,
And he says that if you pray, believing that I hear you, believe that you have the requests made known to me.
mm-hmm.
And so when we encounter these kind of situations, racism and injustice and things like that, you cannot discount prayer
Right, right.
because we're told not to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so therefore, we have to go in with a godly insight,
Mm-hmm.
believing that he hears you and he's going to answer.
Right, right. And you always weave it into um our conversations even privately, and you talk about there's nothing new under the sun, that there's nothing new. I mean, the enemy is not given, actually that's true, because the enemy is not given new tactics, he's not given new tricks. I mean, the dispensation may change, the time may change, the era may change, the cast may change, the players may change, but the situation, but the what it takes place on this stage that we call human history generally is the same. That's why God tells us not to be unaware of the schemes of the enemy, because he doesn't have to try to do tricks because these tricks are working. And I mean, are working. And so God he always takes a remnant for a particular time who will do his bidding for him. And when I look at this time and I would say for our generation, I can remember my mother, and you could say the same thing. I can remember my parents crying when Martin Luther King was assassinated, when the Kennedys was assassinated, but because to them, that was their hope dying. Well, this generation, we're faced with the same thing, with different players. And I think when Obama, and I'm going to talk about the church, I'm going to talk about the church right now, because when Obama went into office, it unleashed who the church really was. I mean, we know who the world is. They're not pretending that they're who they are, wicked. I mean, whatever they do, they're not pretending. But the church was under this umbrella of deception. And I think because for years, I know in the church that I went to for years, they would say, pray for those in authority. So we had to pray for them. Even if we did not agree with who was in authority, it was our job to pray for them, because according to what they were saying in our leadership and according to the word, we could pray for those in authority. But then when I saw Obama come in office, and I'm not saying Obama was God, because I wanted to check out who he was too. To me, at the time, he was the best candidate he was. And I think, I think he was the best candidate, because I've heard a lot of people say, and of course you have too, a lot of people say, you're just voting for him because he's black. No, there were other black men who ran. I mean, and I didn't vote for them. So that wasn't the case. He was the best candidate for me. But I think, that unleashed a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Yeah, you can say
a whole different perspective in how people really thought. It unleashed things, because I heard things like, they wouldn't say because he's a black man, they would say, the Antichrist, Jesus must be coming back. Why? Because a black man is in office. And so you sort of hear all these things. And I'm not talking about things that I heard in the bar, because I don't go to bars, but these are things that you would hear coming from people who are in the church. And I think all of this unraveling, because I grew up in a church we grew up in a church, basically. We grew up in a church where they told us color didn't matter. God doesn't see color. And I bought into that for a little bit, but then you could see in certain situations, color did matter. I mean, the cultures did matter when you were talking about going to India because you wanted to revolutionize that country for Jesus, or when you were going to Israel, or when you go. So you do see color, you do see culture. That's not true. You just don't want me to see my culture. And so, and I begin to say to people, I said, God does see color. Because we're talking about a God who created everything.
That's right.
He created everything. He created the yellow sun, the blue sky, the birds that sing, the green grass, and black and white cows to eat that grass. So all of that is color. All of that is color. So God does see color. So it would be a better perspective for us to say, why did God do it? Because everything God does, he does for a purpose, or a reason, whichever one you want to say. And so it would be better for us to say, what is your purpose? And I think now, and I think it's important, and I share this a lot, that is imperative that we love who we are. Because if we don't love who we are, we can't love each other. We just can't. And that's culturally, that's just who God made us to be is for a purpose. And I see for this purpose right here, when I see the injustice for African American and brown people, it stirs me up. And I was raised, I went to elementary, junior high, high school, it was a mixed culture. There was different cultures in the school. I went to a college that was mixed. Now, I have to tell you, it was a rude awakening when I went to upstate Pennsylvania to go to school. Was it for you?
Yes.
Oh, that was a very rude awakening for me to see. And I'm sure there was prejudice in Philadelphia, but it was like overt prejudice that we were faced with. And so to have African American professors and different people in the church up there, African American church, that took us under their wing, it really helped. Because I know one time, and we talked about this, I had said to my mother, I'm ready to go back to Philadelphia. And she said, baby, you're going to finish school up there. You're going to graduate up there. You couldn't wait to leave home. And so it was like, are you sure I can't go to Drexel? But I'm glad I didn't, because I would have had to leave you. And that
you wouldn't have met me.
I wouldn't have met you. That's true. I'm talking about I was in school. And I wanted to leave after the first year, but it was hard because you were there.
Okay.
And my mother said no. So those two things. It was
easy because I was there.
It was easy to stay there because you were there. That's right. Thank you for that correction. Sure. So tonight you're going to meet some of these people, and I chose this panel because I think they're woke. And when I say woke, I think they are intuitive to what's going on now. They ask questions, and they're concerned, because I didn't pick anybody for this panel because some people don't understand. I mean, change And things are about to change, and we don't like change. I'm gonna have to say, I don't always like change either. And things are going to change because there are some things that have taken place that can never take place again. And then when I hear people say, and I hear it on Facebook because I have a couple blog pages on Facebook, when I hear people say, when they talk about the riots and how bad the riots were, what does that do to you when they talk about the riots when was a man who was murdered?
People are mad. People are upset. They're tired of the same old
Right.
going on time after time.
Right.
And when you think about justice, there was no justice.
Right.
As a result of, because they were police officers, they were able to get away with what they did.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Right.
And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. With we have Black people and white people, and having questions asked about thoughts concerning how to deal with the injustice.
Right.
What can be done to go about making things different, making things right.
Right. Right. I mean, this is the time, this is the season where justice for all is going to be pushed. And so either you get on board, because we're not asking to push people out the way, we're asking to join in. And so we're not just asking for Black people to join in, we're asking for people who, mainly people, when I hear Christians not understanding, I hear in my head a deliberate not understanding. Because if this was your family, your child, if it was your boys, your girls being molested, or your boys being shot down, it would take on a different mindset for you. So I'm just asking for you to put yourself in our place and ask questions accordingly, and not just try to protect yourself, because it's never going to be normal again. It's never going to be normal, what you call normal.
Be the same.
No, it's not going to be same. And making America great again for who? Who are we making America great for? What are we going back to? Slavery? I mean, what are we doing? I don't know. So tonight we're going to have a hard topic concerning it with people who are woke. And so those people who are woke are going to talk to you. They're going to give you their spin on how they see all of this. And maybe we don't all on this panel agree with everything, but at least we are willing to talk about it, because that's the beginning, to have that conversation. So join us. They'll be tuning in a little bit, and join us and join the conversation.
Really definitely looking forward to meeting all of you guys on tonight. So
yes.
I think that this meeting to be very productive, and hopefully my prayer is that we're able to enlighten quite a few people, and really address some of the concerns and relieve people of some of the stress that they're experiencing.
Yes.
I'm like literally, I'm an executive at a construction company, which is my full-time job, and I've been bombarded with people coming into my office, just asking questions and generally concerned about what's going on in our country. So we definitely have, our country has its work cut out for itself.
Yeah. I mean, I like to say, I picked this panel because, and I said, it's a panel that are people who are woke. That's the new buzzword now, woke.
Yeah.
But it's very important, because I think because on Facebook, and some of you may see it, I mean, some of the responses I get concerning things are just, I mean, I'm gobsmacked, if I can use that word, with their reaction to things. Like today, it was, somebody was upset because Jimmy, you may have seen this, because Jimmy, we sort of sometimes fight together. I mean, but the guy was upset because because of George
Floyd.
Floyd George Floyd
George Floyd.
George Floyd, because there was a motorcade, and because there
Okay.
was so much, he thought it was so much attention being paid to him, like he was a dignitary. So he couldn't
Oh, wow.
understand that. So I
Okay.
had to hold back and take a deep breath.
Yes.
It was like, okay, Lord, okay, I guess I wasn't always woke and everything, so I'm just going to take a breather and say, he's just not my people at this time, but you have raised up people for this time to do your bidding.
Yes.
He's just
Yes.
not one of them, so I have to keep
Right.
going. So I answered a little bit, but I thought I'm not going to fight with him for too long because we have stuff to do. And so I
Yeah.
put this panel together because I believe you're a group of people and you're from different places, and I think that you can answer questions for people. I mean, some
Mhm.
questions that people won't ask, and then Howie, when I was looking over your questions, I loved it because it's actually a question. Your questions are questions where you can answer, but also the panel can answer those questions, and those questions will not just help you, Howie, but they will help people looking in. Amen.
Oh, amen.
Yes, and I'm going to start. We need our questions because all of us have 3 questions apiece. All of you have 3 questions apiece, and I think about 3 minutes apiece on each question would be good. And
Okay.
if you need help, I mean, when I say help, if you think somebody can join in or you want somebody else's perspective, you can please do that. Feel free to do that. But I'm going to start, and I call this table virtual round table called Justice for All, because isn't that what we're fighting for?
Yes.
Spirit, soul, and body, justice for all. We're not asking to take away from you so I can have, we're asking for justice for everybody. And
Yes, that's
so
right.
upon that, I'm going to start with Pastor Harry Pitts with a question.
Okay.
Harry, I would like to ask you, how can we combat racism?
I think, you know, when you talk about racism, a couple things that we need to address. One, I think, based upon the Word of God, the Bible says that God created everyone in His own image. So when you look at God, I posed a question this weekend at the Bible study. I asked everyone, I said, "Can you tell me exactly what color is God?" It wasn't a trick question. I was not trying to, trick anyone. But no one can answer the question because God doesn't have color. God is a spirit. So when you talk about God creating humanity in His image, we have to ask the question: where did race come from? I think race is a lie. It's something that's been created. While we do operate in racism, let me be clear about that. I think when you look at race, we shouldn't address it from that standpoint because we're only one group of people. While we're multi-colored, there's only one group. We're not a different species. God created humanity, and what's happened is because of economics and the lies that have been perpetuated some time ago, people now look at this thing and they divide people based on race, and that's a lie, and that's something that we need to get away from. But I think a couple of ways that we can really combat racism is I say that we need to ask the tough questions, and I listed a couple of questions, some things that need to say, and that's to my white brothers and even to my white sisters. I think that really a lot of it starts with them really addressing the situation and asking the tough questions. And I have a list of questions. I'm going to go through these questions really, really, really fast. And these are questions that they need to ask themselves. Have I aggressively sought out more information in effort to enhance my own awareness and understanding of racism? Talking with others, reading, listening. Another question is, have I spent some time recently looking at my own racist attitudes? Because these attitudes are inwoven in everybody, and behaviors as they contribute to or combat racism around and within me. Have I reevaluated my use of terms, phrases, or behaviors that may be perceived by others as degrading or hurtful? Have I openly confronted a racist comment, joke, or action among those around me? Ask yourself these questions. If you're faced with that, have you confronted that? Have I made personal contact with myself to take a positive stance against racism, even at some possible risk when the chance occurs. Say, yeah, you can ask yourself, yes or no, have I done these things? Have I become increasingly aware of racist TV programs, advertising, news broadcasts, holiday observations, slogans, etc.? Have I complained to those in charge of promoting racist TV programs, advertising, news broadcasts, holiday observations, slogans, etc.? Have I suggested and taken steps to implement discussions or workshops aimed at understanding and eliminating racism, sexism, ageism with friends, colleagues, social clubs, or church groups? Have I been investigating and evaluating political candidates at all levels in terms of their stance and activity against racism, sexism, and ageism? Have I investigated curricular or local schools in terms of their treatment of issues of racism, sexism, and ageism? Also, textbooks, assembly, faculty, staff, administration, athletic programs, and directors. Have I contributed time or funds to an agency, fund, or program that actively confronts the problems of racism, sexism, or ageism? Have my buying habits supported non-racist, non-sexist, non-ageist shops, companies, or personnel? Is my school or place of employment a target for my educational efforts in responding to racism, sexism, and ageism? Have I become seriously dissatisfied with my own level of activity in combating racism, sexism, and ageism? Have I realized that white Americans are trapped by their own schools, homes, media, government, families, etc., even when they choose not to be openly racist or sexist? Have I ended my affiliation with organizations which are racist, sexist, ageist in their membership requirements? Have I subscribed to a publication which will educate me in the area of culture other than my own? Have I left copies of the publication and site where my friends and associates might see it and question my interest in it? Have I made an effort to learn some of the language of those in my community who speak something other than standard English? And these are questions I think if we ask these tough questions, say to yourself, can you say yes or no to any of these questions? I think that this is a beginning of really looking inwardly and asking yourself the tough questions, but then confronting, not in a combative manner, but confronting racism when you hear it. When people make statements, what do you say? How do you respond? And I think it really begins with our white brothers and sisters to really work beside. And I'm not saying this I'm not trying to be combative or argumentative, but at this point, what do you do? Because I think the frustration comes because people are really frustrated in what's going on, and that's the reason why we have the protests, the marches, etc. But coming together in unity and harmony, we have to sit down at the table and discuss these tough issues. But it has to start with those that make the decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I think these are good questions, and the reason, because typically, and I'll say white people will say they hate being called racist, and they don't want to ask those difficult questions. They'll say,
Right.
I have a black friend. I mean, all of you will attest to that. I mean, I have black friends, or, I go to a church and black people are there, or, they will say certain things, but those questions take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And I like that. Okay, I'm gonna start with you, Jimmy. I'm gonna go on with you. And the first question I have for you, Jimmy, is what examples of racism do you see at work?
Well, I grew up in Indiana. It was very homogenous. It was mostly white people. I was very naive. Growing up, I didn't see racism, so I thought it was something of the past.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Culpeper, Virginia, which is out in the middle of nowhere, small town, but it was very diverse. And one thing that I noticed right away was that all of the teachers were white, and all of the custodians and support staff and lunch ladies were black. And
this is in Virginia.
This is in Virginia, yeah. And in this school that was probably 50% African American, maybe 40% Hispanic, 20% miscellaneous. Just that they see all the teachers and administrators, principals being white, and seeing like the custodians. I mean, all of those professions are important, but at the same time, they should be seeing teachers of their own race in the school. And so that was, I mean, seeing that was very eye-opening, and just the message that sends to the students was very unfair anyway.
Right.
And then when we moved to Maryland, I was right outside of DC, and it was a much more liberal state, and we had 5 principals, and 3 of the principals were Black, and the school was a similar makeup to what it was in Virginia. It was very, very diverse, and so it was good that the teachers made up that, reflected the student population anyway. But I also noticed that at lunch, all the other art teachers were white. There were 5 of us, and among the art teachers, I would hear racist comments, and this is, I mean, this is in a school that's extremely diverse, and like, if you hear teachers that you're working with making these comments, then that's not going to be a fair education for the student. So
Jimmy, would you feel comfortable to say, for example, what would you hear?
They would make some comment about a student and something that the student did, and then one of the art teachers would say something like, "Oh, well, what color was their skin?" And they would say that it was Black, and then they'd say, "Oh, that makes sense then." And so as I think I was the 3rd-year teacher at that point, and just hearing that was very disheartening. I mean, I don't see it every day. I know people of color see it every day, but so that was very discouraging. And then now that I'm here in Pennsylvania, which is again very the part where I'm in is very very white. I went to a staff party just the other night, and some of the staff members' spouses were talking about George Floyd, and they just kept going and going, and just derogatory comments and racist comments. And whenever I got a word in, I said, do any of us know what it's like to be Black in the United States? Like, we have no idea. Like, so we can't, I mean, we can sit here like we're a bunch of white people talking about this. Like, we can't even begin to speculate. So let's chill, basically. And I mean, I feel like I could have done more, but like it just goes and goes, and it's
that starts just taking a step up.
Right.
There's so much, you're like,
thank you for that.
Well, I'm happy I could, but you're like kind of shocked, but also you're like trying to figure out like, how do I reach these people so they understand? Like, how do you educate while you're trying to like, and I think that's what a big part of it is just helping people understand like this viewpoint that they're just oblivious to.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Howie, that was sort of your question, wasn't it? Yeah. I'll skip over to you because you said, I want to reach out to my Black friends to see how they're doing. How should I do it? How should I do this? Yeah. And so can anybody answer that? Carla? Harry?
Yes. Carla, did you want to say something?
How do you reach out to your Black friends? Yeah. I think it depends on your Black friend.
I'm one of them. So how would he reach out to me?
And I did reach out.
Yeah,
you did reach out. You should.
But yeah, I was explaining to Sharon. I said, as a white person, like, you don't want to say something that's wrong or hurtful inadvertently.
Yes.
And I was really concerned about that. And I was telling Sharon, I was watching the Today Show, and there were 3 Black cast members of the Today Show and they were having like a totally open conversation, and the white woman said, like, I want to ask you how you're doing, and I'm just so afraid that I'll say something that's wrong or that I'll hurt you, or just by saying like, how are you doing? It's like, you're asking me how am I doing? Oh my gosh, you know, and this time I'm, you know, things are crazy. But anyway, I'm sorry. I apologize, Carla.
No. But I mean, it makes sense you asked the question, but usually my follow up to that question is, if you heard that your friend had a death in the family.
Carlos, move up a little bit. You sound like you're
sorry.
away.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, that's good.
Yes.
So if you heard that your friend had a death in the family, or that they just learned that they had cancer, would you be too afraid to reach out to them? Or would you try to navigate that? Like, most people would say, hey, I just heard this about what was going on, and I just want to reach out and say I'm with you, and then if there's anything I can do, that's enough. I think that because we've tiptoed around race for so long, we act like it's, I just found out you have a communicable disease, and I'm scared to touch you, right? But it's not that. And so, yes, it's going to be different for different people, right? And the closer you are to that person, the better you will be able to navigate that process. Because there's some Black people who are like, don't call me, because I don't, even though I'm friends with you, I'm wrestling with certain things. But I think that's also true where there are some people who, if their parent dies, they turn off their phone and say, like, don't check on me because I'm processing. I need to process, right? But then you have other people who are like extroverts and super connected to people, and they're like, I want to talk about this and I want to be super open about it. But I think the problem is that we forget that we are relational beings. And in resolving the issue of racism, I think we need to go back to the fact that we are relational beings. We need to be in a relationship with one another.
Yeah, I think that's a very good response, Carla. I think also, Howie, when you talk about such a sensitive issue and engaging someone and trying to understand, like you said, without being intrusive or offensive, I think your approach and what you're doing is correct. And to be openly vulnerable to them and tell them, you know, I end you. Can you help me? Because I don't know, you know. I want to say and be honest about your feelings and say, you know, it's difficult for me to have walked in your shoes, and say that. Let them know that you're genuinely wanting to learn. And I think once you break the ice and let people know that this is the direction that you want to come from, and my intentions, and let them know, you know, my intentions are not to hurt you, but I genuinely want to learn. Can you teach me? Because I honestly do not know. I want to learn. I understand that white privilege is real. I understand that racism is real. And coming from a white male, man, Howard, that is so powerful. Right. That is so powerful in the fact that you want to engage. And I think most of the time people, and it's not to try to condemn anybody or condemn our white sisters or brothers, but we have to do a pulse check and say that this is real. You have to talk about it. Mm-hmm. You have to deal with it and be vulnerable when it comes to that, and let them know that, you know, I'm open to this, and I genuinely want to know. I want to learn. Can you tell me what you're going through? I don't know. I know that, like Carlos said, we're relational beings, but I want to break through or transcend beyond all the garbage that has been happening in this country systemically, and we want to basically break that breach. Teach, you know, each one teach one, and just let them know that you want to learn, you want to know, and you don't know, and the mere fact that you want to reach out says a lot. It says, one, that you care, and two, that you're genuinely concerned about what's concerning them, and let them know that their issue is your issue. Yeah. Yeah. You know,
and sometimes I like the Carla, you had compared it a little bit. Then I have a question to ask you, Carla. But you had compared it to if somebody dies, like how do you handle it? Yeah. And I can remember when my daughter passed, there were people in our church at the time, and I understood this, who avoided me because they didn't know what to say. And they thought that same thing, how you were saying, they didn't want to say something stupid. But there were some people who took the plunge and said, and asked me, how are you doing? What is this? Because sometimes fear is the fear in some of the people, I found out later on, they didn't want to ask me because they were in fear of, what if this happens to me? What am I going to do? I mean, they took, they begin to perceive it, in a different fashion of fear. And so they didn't reach out to me at all. So with this, Howie, and I agree with Harry and with Carla, you asking is everything. Jimmy being here is everything. That means you're woke.
Yes.
Part of it all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Carla, I have a question for you. We've suffered these atrocities before in our nation, leading to protests, even riots. Why is this time different? What must we do different? What must we do differently so that our descendants only read about this in history?
So the first question, so why is this time different? The biggest thing is that social media, right? That everything that happens has the possibility of being on the world stage, right? And so generally speaking, Americans tend to have this idea that America is the greatest nation in the world. Even if bad stuff happens here, we're still better than everybody else, right? That's sort of the mentality. But then when the world sees our muck, right? Like, when the world sees all your dirt and you can't hide it, now all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I have to sort of look in the mirror, right? It's sort of like if you're the pastor of the church and you have been, abusive to your children or your wife, and then all of a sudden it's public, now everybody's going to have a universal conversation. Right. So I think that one of the reasons that it's different right now is really that we're on the world stage. That's one part. Yeah. And the second part is that I think that white people generally got their eyes opened to like, well, wait a minute, like we just saw that, and then we saw that, and then we saw that, we saw that. I'm seeing a pattern. Maybe what they've been saying might be making sense. I don't know what it is. And I think that I personally thought what was very interesting in the moment was the young white woman that was in the video of George Floyd, who's yelling, he's not breathing, stop. And they push her back. Right. And I think that, I honestly think that it affected white people differently subconsciously without them knowing that it was a white woman standing there yelling to stop, and the officers pushed her back. And
was she a white woman?
She was.
She was black. I didn't see her.
No. There was a white. There's multiple people there. Yes. There's a white woman who says he can't breathe. Stop. He can't breathe. And then the Asian officer begins to shift her and move her out of the way, right? So whether people consciously know it, all of a sudden it's like, wait, well, she's saying something's wrong. And so I think that's sort of what made it different. I think COVID made it different because people were home.
Yes.
Emotionally boiling it's at the top of their chest and their mind. And
they have to see it.
And so like, now all of a sudden this happens and they're like, rah, like everything, like this is wrong, that's wrong, they lied to us about COVID, they're probably lying to us about this, lies everywhere, I'm mad, right? And so it's beautiful because for me, one of my consistent struggles with us as Americans has been us being asleep. We have been asleep to all the atrocities that are happening in this country, abroad, that we're doing to each other, that just by living as Americans, we are negatively sometimes affecting other nations because of what we spend our money on. Like, we are so asleep. And so I think that the video sort of worked that up. So
yes, that's good.
Right. What mistakes should we try to avoid? And this is Black people that have already arrived. who are in better position, particularly like if they're middle class or upper class. This is still in the other one. Like some of them had been living in a bubble too, where they could like hide, and they've been forced to choose publicly, right? So that all of those different things are different. I think what we have to do different is we have to actually finish the race, right? So the civil rights movement was shifting, right, towards the end of the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
It was shifting from it being a Black message to a us message, a message of equity, human rights, right? Dr. King was organizing the white labor movements and saying, hey, like, I think y'all are our enemy, but you're actually struggling just like we are. We're in this together. He went to the LGBT community and was like, listen, y'all might be out on those fringes, but I'm gonna tell you to come back up, right? And I'm gonna tell you, this is our issue. Let's get this nation to, justice for all. Inequity for one is inequity for us all, right? And then some people sold out. Some people, they got corrupted by being established, and the movement stopped. So then the system was allowed to readjust itself, and they just figured a new way of creating a new Jim Crow, right? Creating a new system of injustice. And so I think that now people my age, I'm in my 40s, you guys, but especially the young people, have to never stop until there's liberty and justice for all, right? Mm-hmm. They like, even when it's like, oh, wow, this law changed, that seems really good, they have to say, no, like, that's not enough. Let's keep going. Dr. King said it multiple times in his later speeches, even after we got the Civil Rights Act. He said that's not enough. Just changing the laws doesn't change the system until you change the hearts of men. Once you change the hearts, they'll abide by the rule of law that we're now creating. So we need to keep working at the hearts. I think these young people, people are not giving them credit, but these high school kids, these elementary school kids, these kids who are in their 20s, of all races, are like, I just don't understand why I'm being mean to somebody just because of the color of their skin. Like, I just don't even get it, right? And so, because even if their parents are like, no, you're supposed to hate them, they're like, but I don't get it. Like, she's really cool on social media, so why can't I love her, right? And so I think if we educate them, push them, and let them be, and old people shut up and not impute into them your prejudices. I think that this time can be different, but we also are going to have to affect the economic system. We don't have this conversation attached to economics. We're never going to win this fight. So the two of them, we got to talk about race and economics.
And that really makes people mad when you start talking about their money.
Yeah,
it really makes people mad.
Yeah.
I'm saying. So Harry, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on reparations for African Americans? Reparations for African Americans.
Reparations. That's something. You know what? I wrote, because I do a lot of writing, and I wanted to make sure that I say this accurately. So if you guys just bear with me, I wrote out a whole list of things, and I wanted to put some history in this.
You got 5 minutes, Harry.
Okay, it won't take too long. I promise. Let me read this to you guys. The unrest in cities across the United States this week is just the latest manifestation of a struggle that will continue until the wealth gap between white people and black people is addressed. Black people will not be able to properly care for their families or provide generational wealth if this financial change isn't made. What is the wealth gap? It is the stark divide between how much capital white people and black people control. One estimate, the typical white family has wealth of $171,000. This is nearly 10 times than the $17,150 average black families have. Let me put it another way. The typical black household remains poorer than 80% of white households. This stunning wealth gap between the races has persisted in good times and bad. For the past 70 years, it did not get better after the civil rights legislation was passed in the 1960s or during the Obama administration. And it will continue to fuel unrest and anger and a deep amount of distrust of government officials until there's an economic change in wages due to the seed of former slaves is paid. And until these wages in the form of reparations is paid, there will continue to be a divide in this country. The wealth gap is one of the reasons there are protests today. It doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily want to use this saying that is, this is the straw that broke the camel's back, this wealth gap. But many middle-class white people, especially those who grew up in the suburbs, like to think that they got there because they were smart. They have just very high moral qualities. They got there because of hard work, intelligence, and maybe a little luck. And while we may be sympathetic to the plight of others, we close down when we hear the words affirmative action or racial preferences. We worked hard. This is what some white people say. We worked hard. We made it on our own. The thinking goes, why don't they? After all, it's been almost 40 years now since the Civil Rights Act was passed. What we don't readily acknowledge is that racial preferences have a long institutional history in this country, a white history. Here are a few ways in which government programs and practices have channeled wealth and opportunities to white people at the expense of others. We all know the old history, but it's still worth reminding others of its scale and scope. Affirmative action in America and the American workplace first began in the 17th century when European indentured servants, the original source of unfree labor on the new tobacco plantations of Virginia and Maryland, were replaced by African slaves. In exchange for their support and their policing of the growing slave population, lower class Europeans won new rights, entitlements, opportunities from the planter elite. White Americans were also given a head start with the help of the United States Army. The 1830 Indian Removal Act, for example, forcibly relocated Cherokee, Creeks, and other Eastern Indians to the West Mississippi River to make room for white settlers. The 1862 Homestead Act followed suit, giving away millions of acres for free of what had been Indian territory west of the Mississippi. Ultimately, 270 million acres, or 10% of the total land area of the United States, was converted to private hands, overwhelmingly white, under the Homestead provision. I want to be clear, I do in fact believe that there are some kind-hearted, empathetic white people in this country. But the issue arises when those in power don't care or give a ham sandwich about the plight of black people who are human beings and not former slaves. The elite or power brokers posit themselves as moral arbiters, are in fact complicit with the injustices that happen in this country against black people. The powerful sit back from their palatial homes in jets and without any human conscience or moral compass and say to themselves and their friends privately, they, meaning blacks, are a bunch of savages. And with ease, these politicians hand over $4 trillion to their friends in tax breaks to oil companies, cruise industry, real estate industry, private equity firms. This is the stimulus package that just took place. Lobbying groups, airlines, and the list go on. Take, for instance, the airlines were handed $50 billion and came back to say that this was not enough. These kleptocrats continue their process whereby they added to the wealthiest class in this country $434 billion to their wealth. Please examine this large disparity and question if something is wrong while people have no health care and Michigan does not even have clean drinking water. And black people cannot get decent housing or a failed justice system that over-polices the poorest of the poor in their own neighborhoods. Let's look at the Political Access Committee who have been handed $192 million to politicians for campaign contributions in the last 2 decades. Once again, 85% of this stimulus package recently has gone to the wealthiest 1% in this country. Companies have moved offshore, receiving tax breaks. Isn't this somewhat ridiculous when Americans, particularly Black Americans, still don't have jobs while these large corporations receive major tax breaks at the demise of the American people and the seed of African Americans who are still viewed as 3/5 human? We've watched Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, his corporation Amazon, not pay any federal taxes at all. The big engine of justice and equity for all is falling apart. And the spin doctors want people to focus on race while they steal the cobbler dry. And I say, wake up, human race, to the power brokers who have robbed and pillaged this country and its wealth for their own selfish desire. The statement of Malcolm X holds true when we talked about an internal colonies within the United States. That myopia and inability to respond, what we explain why the uprising is taking place in this country. When you talk about the wealth gap, that's the reason why the marches are needed. That's the reason why it's going to be that division until this is addressed. It has to be addressed. And people, when you want to genuinely find out and touch people's heart, talk about money. People will march with you. They will stand beside you. But when you talk about money that is due to you because of your ancestors, the real person or the real nature of who they are will come out.
Right. That's exactly right. You got it. That's exactly right. Carla, would you want to respond to that? I'm going to ask your question.
You want to ask the question, or you want me to just respond?
Yeah. Do you have anything to say to that? Or otherwise, I'll ask your question.
I definitely agree with the history. I've been trying to figure out, practically speaking, how reparations would work in light of the fact that we have a number of white Americans who are still very anti our existence, right? Our very existence. That's the one level. How reparations will work, and this is not going to be a popular opinion, but I got to throw it in there. For the Black people who have arrived that don't want to give up what they got as well, because it's going to affect them because they worked their way up, right? And I know, because part of the conversation, so I've seen on the federal level, the conversations about what reparations, what they want to do, and them looking at people's economics and deciding how they're going to distribute what, right? And some of our people, just remember that some of our people also own slaves, right? And some of our people, even though they got freed, they benefited from this system and have continued to benefit, right? And so I'm wondering, because of where people's minds are, can we get them to agree on reparations, right? At this point, I don't think that people are ready. I may be wrong, and people can disagree with me, but I do think that we need to put pressure on the system to force an economic shift to equity, right? Like we need a jubilee, right? We need a reset, split up the land. The other concern for me, even though we're talking about Black people, I am always going to throw in our Native American brothers and sisters, which Harry did mention, right? Who lost all of this land, who was forced, whose culture was taken away. And so you don't have to ask my question. I'll tell you that, because I think these two things go together. A lot of people are saying, well, we just need to make a Black economy. Like, we need a new Black Wall Street. And Harry's shaking his head. And I'm going to say that doesn't solve the problem, right?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't resolve the issue, because we've done that. And then if you look through the history of race riots throughout the United States history, what consistently happened was it was the poor white laborers who were consistently struggling with money. And then the media or someone else, I'm actually about to write an article on this, would blame the Black man for that issue. And then they would go burn the Black city because they're still poor, right? You have too many people, you have too few. You got this 1% that has all the money and is keeping it to themselves and making sure nobody, right, makes it into their space.
They're still doing that now.
They're still doing it right now. They're doing it in many, many ways and many forms. So I think that this is, in my heart, I think that we need to get a critical mass of people who say that we're not going to buy into your system anymore. Right.
Yes.
So we're not going to spend money. We're not going to be the consumers. We're going to let the stock market go all willy-nilly, right? Until you sit down and say, you are Americans, and especially Black Americans. We know that y'all were screwed over before. Then I think we can have a conversation about reparations when everybody's like, oh my gosh, I have nothing, right? Right. So I think that we have to mess with the stock market. So the people at the top is like, I need y'all to go back to being our slaves so we can get our money. And when they're ready to have a conversation, then we'll say, well, this is what it's going to look like, right?
Yeah.
This is what we want our economic system. And I just want to throw this in there, right? We have this immigration issue. So what they've done is they put us against each other. So you do white versus Black, and then Black people will be like, then they take us down to the next level and they'll say, oh, the Black people will be like, oh, but the Asians, right? They come in and they get all these resources. But what Black people don't realize is that they're good Asians, they're good Europeans, they're good Africans and what I mean by that is that we have immigration laws that allow people to come from certain countries, but not others, right? So
Right.
we lump Asians together, but a Cambodian in America is not having the same experience as a Korean in America, right? A Laotian in America is not having the same experience as a Chinese person in America through our immigration laws, right? Same thing with people from Latin countries. If you come from Spain, right? If you come from our good friendly countries, you have a different, and what I mean is the economic supports that you need to begin to build up, right? Native Americans are, some people be like, oh, well, they got the casinos. No, right? They're still being used, abused, mistreated. So we have to come up with an economic system that takes into account all of these fouled up laws that we've had for so long that now there are a lot of people here. There's Black people, historic slavery. We have been screwed, not have land. Everything that Harry said is absolutely right. But then you have all these other groups that are like still trying to struggle. Why are they here illegally? Because when they try to come legally, they don't come from the right country, right? So they can't get in here legally. And people don't even know how much it costs. So we need an economic system such that we don't keep repeating the past
Same
history.
thing.
When
Right.
the Irish was burnt, I think it was in the 1863 in Chicago, where the poor Irish workers went and burned down the area where there were Black people because they were like, we can't get no jobs, and y'all coming here and trying to get jobs, and we fighting for the same jobs, so we want to get rid of all the Black people, right? And so now, if you listen to the language of Trump, build the wall, right? What they've done is now created a new enemy. So now White people can be mad with Black people, they can be mad with Mexicans, but no one will look at the fact that the 1% is keeping everything.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
As
That's
they
exactly right.
supposed to. It's not trickling down. That's why race and economics got to go together.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Oh
Yes.
my God. Can I say something briefly?
Yeah. Go ahead, Harry.
Carla, you're so right. And see, that's my point. When I initially started off, and I do this to be provocative, when you talk about race, I tell people, I say that race is a lie that was created by the ruling party. When you go back and you look at the early 1600s, Black people of African descent and white people worked together. They were politicians. There was no such thing as an all-Black party, but because they saw where poor whites and former slaves were progressive, they had to come up with a system to deal with this. So, and what's happened is, while the 1% continue to get wealthier, they want you to look at race while they steal the cupboards dry. And nobody think about Trump's statement when he said, let's make America great again. His thoughts in making that statement was to say, let's go back to the 1600s,
Right.
where we have a ruling class and everybody else are indentured slaves. That's the reason why I say America needs to wake up to what's going on. I think I believe that the Lord, while we've gone through this situation, I think we're about to hit critical mass, that this needs to take place, like Carla was saying. There needs to be this awakening. And I think 40 million Americans are unemployed, Black, white, Asian, and Latino.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is reality. But please explain to me how the wealthy during the pandemic, we're basically in a recession, make $434 billion in an economy that is almost obliterated.
Right.
Something is wrong. They want us to keep looking at race.
Yes.
They want us to fight while they get wealthier and their children's children get wealthier. Let's turn the tides. Let's keep marching, and let's look at where the problem is coming from, because they have all the wealth and the power.
Right. Amen.
Right.
Amen. Amen.
Right.
Amen. I love this question, Jimmy. This question is to you. And I love it because in the midst of all of this, and all of us are believers on this panel, I'm looking, all of us are born again. And this is important because we can't separate who we serve with what we do. I mean, it's all intertwined. But your question is, how has racism affected our belief system?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How has racism affected our belief system? I love that.
Yeah. Well, growing up, I was definitely more conservative. I identified as a Republican. And you're told that if you're pro-life, you're Republican kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And so the more that this has progressed, you start to see that whenever they say pro-life, they're kind of, as long as like the baby's born, then they forget about it. But they aren't pro-life when it comes to people of color. They aren't pro-life when it comes to immigrants. And so it reveals a lot of the hypocrisy.
The facade.
What's that?
It's a facade, isn't it?
It is. It's a facade, and it reveals a lot of hypocrisy. And so I can't get behind any conservative candidates. I obviously can't get behind Trump. But there's just like this whole, they care up until the baby's born, and then it's just like, don't care after that.
Oh, wow.
The party of pro-life isn't.
Now, let's say it this way, up until the baby's born, and then we'll shoot them and kill them.
Yeah. Yeah, and make excuses for the police officer.
Right.
Just every time it happens, they'll just make an excuse.
Right. That's good.
God, I love it.
Yeah. And Howie, I like your question. As soon as I find it here, it says, what is the best way for me to support the Black community, not only presently, but continually? Like, what can he do? What can we suggest for Howie? Because Howie's going to take this to his white friends, even though I'm your best Black friend. Oh, I just said that. I'm not, but you know, how can he support?
I think his presence is one thing, but to speak truth to power, to bring correction, and use the tool that God gave him, his voice, his intelligence, and call right and wrong, and call people out when they do those things.
Right.
You know, call them out and say that. You know, say that is wrong. You know, there's absolutely something wrong. Tell them, you know, you say you name the name of Christ, but yet and still you'll have an issue if your white daughter dates a black guy. There's something wrong with that.
Right.
You know, and just, you know, say something about it. Use your voice. Stand for equity. Stand for justice. Speak about things intelligently. Bring in historical truths and educate people, because people are ignorant. They're ignorant, and they think that what they believe and what they've learned from their forefathers is right. No, you got to use the gift that God gave you, your intelligence and your voice. You have power in your gift, and speak truth. Always be honest and speak truth, and call right and wrong.
Right. You know what that reminds me of? And I was reading today in Proverbs 24. It's 24 and 25. It says, whoever says to the wicked, you are in the right, will be cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations, but those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. And I think that's a big thing because I thought, and we may have talked about this a little bit, Harry, but I think within the church, I'll say, there's different things that this administration did, and I'll say Trump, for example, when he would do things wrong, it was right. It was like, but the scripture says that's wrong, but now it's right. And now,
So in their eyes.
Yeah, in their eyes, it's right. So what? So we're calling right wrong and wrong right. What are we doing here? I mean, has the scripture shifted?
And it's happening every day.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right, Howard. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Every day. Every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'd like to offer two things that you can do. So this is something that I posted on my Facebook page, and I asked all of my white allies to share. But I think that it would speak volumes if white folks who are in positions of power would switch places with a person of color, particularly the Black and brown. I mean, literally say, like, Tim Cook says, I will no longer be the CEO of Apple. I am giving this position to Carla Kroll, and then I'm going to work under her to support her so she can be successful in this position, right? And so it doesn't, like, people are like, oh, I've quit, and then I hope that they would hire a person of color, but they didn't. And I said, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, like, you are in a higher position, you take their position, and then you say to them, and in my role, I'm going to do my job and support you so that you can be successful. And sending that out to your white friends, because that's really putting your money, like all of these beautiful letters, we support Black people, we stand with the Black community, doesn't mean anything if you're not willing to lose something in the process, right? I think that's one thing. I think on a personal level, white folks that are a little bit more woke, who are knowledgeable of white privilege, and it's similar to speak truth to power, but we need you to befriend the racists, right? We need you to walk the journey with them from where they are to where we hope them to be, because I can't build that bridge, but you can build that bridge. You can start on that side and love them. And there's a book that I've been recommending to all of my white friends. It's called Rising Out of Hatred. It is a book, I can't remember the author's name, but it's written about a man named Derek Black. Derek Black was supposed to inherit the white nationalist movement and party. His godfather is David Duke. Right? And so his former godfather, because they have now disowned him. His family has disowned him, everyone, because he's walked away from white nationalist ideology. But what is special about this book, what brought me to tears, and what I've said to many of my white friends who are like, I don't deal with racists. Like, I can't be around them because, like, they not here, blah, 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 blah. So what happened was, once people were cool with him, he hid his white nationalism, but he would go on the radio, spout this different ideology. But while he was in college, he kind of like went about his business, engaged people nobody knew. Once people found out who he was, everybody stopped being his friend, right? People didn't want to talk to him. They ostracized him as a racist. But there were like 4 people, one of which was from like Peru or Colombia or somewhere. I can't remember where he was. One was a Jewish man. One was a liberal white woman, and I forget the other person. And they started having dinner with him every Friday. And they would talk to him. They'd let him be him. They play games with him. Sometimes they would ask him questions. Sometimes they would actually stay away from that space, right? But what happened was, after a while, it was hard. He got to this point where he had to make a decision, because he's like, everything I've been taught, everything I believed about these groups, how I was supreme to them, how I was better than them, and how they were going to destroy us. They were coming to take everything away from white people. They're not doing. Something is wrong. And so he's in Europe, and he says he had this moment where he felt like he had to choose, and something about all of the love that he received from these people who disagreed with him and walked the journey with him, he just couldn't hold on anymore. And so he walked away. Nat walked away from his family, walked away from his support system, walked away from everything. So it's a really good book to encourage people. But I think the biggest, the greatest thing a white person can do is to actually love and walk the journey with the white supremacists, with the racists, because I can't have that conversation. And sometimes I think the danger is you guys who love us get into an argument of like, you got to see that they're people. What is wrong with you? And you want to demonize them. But the thing is, part of the reason why they're holding on to this, I think at the spiritual core, forget it, there's a normative distribution curve. Some people are just evil. Let's put them aside, right? Let's exclude them. A lot of people are just afraid. They're just afraid of what they'll lose. They're afraid of what it means. They've been trained that we are to be feared, and you have to help them get over the fear, right? Move them from fear to faith. Move them from fear to trust. Move them from fear to hope. And that is something that only you can do until they get to the point where they're like, they want to sit down and have a conversation with me. And then I'll tell them the truth, right? No, I'm just
kidding. You know, Carl, I was in a situation like that where a white friend of mine told me about his cousin. He said, Herb, you know, he hates black people. He can't stand black people. I said, well, introduce him to me. Let me talk to him. And we became friends. Me talking to him became friends. And the thing was, I just loved him, you know, and he received that love, you know. And the biggest thing that blew his mind was I invited him to my wedding. And he couldn't believe it.
Wow.
He couldn't believe it, you know, but it turned his head around. And I think a lot of times there's just ignorance, you know. People, they go by what they heard, things that they have thoughts concerning black people, but don't really know because they don't really know anybody black.
Yeah, they have no experience.
Right.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly right.
And then
so,
the media loves to perpetuate this idea that we're these evil, hateful, you know, murdering, riotous group of people. And so, like, you have no experience with these people. You watch the news or you watch the movies. It's like, we love our guns and we want to run around and shoot and steal. Like, that's the story they tell about us. And then
drive the stake in.
Exactly.
Carrie, this sort of ties into your question. It says, what do you think needs to happen in the body of Christ? And I think that's important. What needs to happen in the body of Christ what do you think needs to happen in the body of Christ from a biblical standpoint regarding racism in the church?
I think one of the things that I guess that has, you know, with the death of George Floyd, that's been a constant agitation for me, is that the church has been, our white brothers and sisters, they've gone, it's like they're in the witness protection program. They've gone missing. Yes. So, and I'm being genuinely honest about this. I was surprised recently. I watched Rod Parsley come out and speak, but this is something that I think about. If you're pastoring, if you're called by God, if you color God anything, you color God love.
Right.
Because when Jesus Christ died, God didn't say that Christ died for this particular race of people or this particular race of people. The Bible says, for God so loved the world, we're in the world, that he gave his only begotten son. Right. So God doesn't see color. God is not concerned about that. I think that as what the body of Christ needs to do is that if I'm a member in your congregation and I'm black, if you take my money and I'm good enough to play on the praise team, sing in the choir, and come and support, then you have to take up my cause as well. Okay. Otherwise, you're being hypocritical, because when you look at prophetic ministry, even in prophetic ministry, the prophets spoke truth to power. You look at Elijah when he spoke to Ahab and Jezebel. He took up the cause of Israel, or those people that were suffering. Jesus did the same thing. But it's interesting that these people, I think about some of the white evangelicals. They are totally silent about this issue of racism and abuse and inequality. Okay, and what's happening is people are shocked. But I can say this, that if there, and I mentioned this to you, Sharon, that if there is haze if there's haze in the pulpit, then there's going to be mist, okay, in the congregation. In other words, there's this shadow where you're quiet and silent. They're going to be quiet and silent as well.
Right.
And I think the body of Christ has to go. It has to begin with us. Has to go to the government and speak to them. And these politicians, I don't care if it's the president, I don't care if it's your senator, and tell them, until you take on the sufferings of the people, we're not going to vote for you.
Right.
We've got to start speaking with our vote. We've got to start telling our leaders, I don't care if you're black or white, that you've got to take up the cause of justice and equality. And if they're not going to support your cause, then you need to leave that church, because that is not Christ. I question the viability of a person that says they love the Lord,
right,
and
right.
you issue
Come
like
on.
this, that you're quiet. I question whether or not you know the Lord or not, because God doesn't operate like that. And the church has got to start embracing the causes of truth, okay, and start embracing congregation. I think congregations need to work together collectively in unison and start speaking the same message, okay? And the leadership, white evangelical pastors, have to come out publicly and speak out against what President Trump is doing, okay? President Trump is not he is not a Christian. I'm sorry. First of all, when someone does a photo shoot with the Bible upside down, there's something wrong with that, okay? So and you have people that are taking photo ops with this man. The leadership, Kenneth Copeland, I'll name some people. Kenneth Copeland, okay, Paula White, okay. Some of these quote unquote mega church pastors come out and speak about the cause and the issues of black people. Okay, they need to do that. If you accept our dollars, you have to take our cause. And the church for too long has been quiet and silent, particularly our white brothers that are in leadership, and they can do this. They can do this, and I think that's where change begins. They have to speak out. You have Dr. King, Malcolm X, all these black leaders that have been marching, fighting, preaching, teaching. But everybody else, when you start talking about race issues, we want to get quiet. And we want to, hug and have a kumbaya moment as if that's going to make the issue go away. What makes the issue go away is when we work together in unity and then stand up to those that are in power and tell them collectively, embrace arm in arm, and tell them that this is wrong. And our pastors that are white need to spearhead and say that to them. Say that this stuff is wrong.
Right. That's right.
I agree.
Anybody else have anything to add?
Well, we sort of talked about this the other day on the phone, Sharon, and I was saying, about, I can't remember because I talked to you and Kimball one day apart. But we have this group of people that are calling themselves evangelicals, and my friends know that I was raised in the church. They know I'm a born again, spirit-filled person. They know this, and that my family is, and they've asked me, like, are you and your family like this? Like, there are these people that are calling themselves evangelicals, and they're doing all this horrible stuff.
Right.
And we have this president who is also calling himself like an evangelical. He's the head of all these people. Like, what is up with this? And I said, they're not evagelicals. They are Trump evangelicals.
Yeah.
This group, I think it's been there for a long time, but they now have a leader, and it's, I don't know, it makes me crazy. But just going back to what I think you said earlier, Harry, is we have to get out there and vote. Like, this is probably one of the most crucial times in history, because there is this evil that has been building, and so much of that evil in this administration has revolved around racism.
It is.
And we have got to get any and everybody out there to vote, no matter what.
Big story.
Going off of what Howie just said, if you look at people who say they're Christians and then they are very adamant Trump supporters, and Trump says that he's a Christian, and just the things that he says and the way that he acts, then those who aren't Christians aren't going to want anything to do with Christianity if that's their example.
Wow.
Wow.
That's true. That's so true.
Wow.
And I think he's doing a huge disservice to God, to Christianity, by claiming that he's a Christian and then saying the things he says and doing the things he does.
Right.
It's tragic.
Right.
Yep.
I think there has been so much earthly damage to the kingdom in the past 4 years. It's just incredible. I mean, folks have taken the name of Jesus into like a horrible place, by this horrible examples of humanity, and so many times Trump is compared to Hitler. And I think, Hitler did the same thing in Germany. He took people who, were Christians and distorted that and dragged the name of Christ into horrible places. And it's like the same thing is happening now. And, I am fearful. I am so fearful that he will be reelected. And if this has been bad these 4 years, what will the next 4 years be like? Because it won't get better.
We have to remember one thing in all of this. We have to remember who God is. We can't alleviate him from the equation, who God is. And I seen this post of this pastor. He has said, because people say God, put Donald Trump in office, for a reason. He said, the reason was to expose the hearts of the church. It was to expose, and he said, in church you have failed, because we have and it's the same thing what I read earlier about, we have called right wrong and wrong right. It's like when you look at it, it's like, it's almost like I think of when you're renovating your house. Sometimes you have to tear the house up, tear roof walls down, it looks real messy. And until you can do your kitchen over, do your living room over, until you can start building on it, there has to be you have to destroy stuff first. And I think because we grew up in the church, Herbie and I grew up in the church where everybody was saying kumbaya. You would know this, Harry. Kumbaya, we love each other. We were locking hands, except when Obama, the first time this was exposed, when Obama was in office, all of a sudden we learned for years to pray for those in authority. When Obama was in office, suddenly with the Antichrist is in office and the world's coming to an end, Jesus must be coming back soon. Why? Because a black man is in office. And so it exposed the heart of the church. And so the church has to repent. And the church, I see people, Christians, believers on, I'll say Christians, should be Christians on Facebook, and they'll write, and they'll post things like, when we turn from our wicked ways and start serving, that scripture, we turn from our wicked ways and start serving the Lord, then God will heal the land. It's like,
Mhm.
what are you talking about? I mean, really, you're talking about taking that scripture and perverting it. You're saying, if you do this, if we can go back to the days where God was in the White House. When was that?
Yes.
Was it the
Yes.
time when the presidents from long ago were like raping black women and making babies with them? Is that the time? What time are we talking about going back to?
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't think, I know the church itself has to repent and stop making like we're trying to save the world. We're trying to save the babies. We're trying to save everything for Jesus. No, you don't. We join in with what God is doing. This is God. I mean, God is in charge here, not us. We join in with him. And that helps us. That really helps us to know that God is the one that's in charge and his ways are higher than our ways. So it doesn't look like he's in charge, but he knows exactly what he's doing. And so we have to join in with what he's doing. And I love what everybody is saying because we have something we can work with. You're not done because I'm calling you back. This is just part one. But this gives us something to think about,
Yes.
to chew on, to talk about, to bring other people in. I mean, we have to talk about this. We're all on Facebook, whatever social media you have. We have to talk about it and use some of these, implement some of these things that we got tonight because I love it. I love it. So, Carla, I want you to end with something. This is a crucial time in our nation. What mistakes should we try to avoid in addressing the issues of racism in America? What should we try to avoid?
Demonizing ignorance.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow. That's good.
So I think that, and I sort of want to make a comment on that last part. I think we need to also clarify language. You know, I grew up in the church and we use that term, the church, but I think we forget that the word Christian was originally supposed to be like a sort of a negative thing, like, oh my gosh, those are followers of Christ, right? And it was a way of identifying them. And I think that we need to redefine this. We need to redefine the whole, they're a Christian because they're labeling themselves a Christian.
Right.
And
Right.
really think about what it means to actually be a follower of the practices that Christ left for us. And use that as the litmus test for what it means to be a Christian, right? And so let's start a new book. But with that, we demonize ignorance, and with this whole like being like Christ, I think when I read the New Testament and when I think about it, I think it's very interesting that when Jesus gets pretty pissed off and is like super going at people, it's usually leaders who are supposed to know better.
Yeah. That's
when
right.
he talks to the masses and the groups, and he speaks in parables, and he knows that they're not going to get it, and it takes him a while, and he has to say the same thing 12 different ways, but he just does it patiently over and over again. So I have a grace and a patience for white ignorance now that more so. I used to be sort of militant. I thought I was going to grow up and be the next Angela Davis. But I played this game. It's White Privilege Monopoly. I didn't know that that's what it was. We were playing it. And the leader of the game basically is making rules as it goes along, and you just, you're just playing the game, right? So we're all playing the game. I was the only Black person playing the game. Everybody else in the group was white playing the game. And while we were going through, like certain things would happen, like you go past go. Some people would get $200. Some people, she said, no, you only get $100. I pass go, she give me $400, right? So, we're going through, I going to jail. She's like, no, don't worry about it. You don't have to go to jail. Another person gets the jail card, and she's like, you stay there for 2 terms, right? So we go through the whole game. And we get towards the end, and I cannot remember what happened. I want you to know this traumatized me. I've never played Monopoly again after this experience, right? So we get to something, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that was so unfair. Like, I didn't have to do that. Why did she have to do it? Something along those lines. And she said, you didn't. I just presented it out there. You didn't have to accept it, right? So
Wow.
at that moment, I go, this is white privilege. Ah! you know, and I scream and I get mad. And I'm like, this is what it is. So then I'm like, emotionally, I went through it. I went crazy because I actually felt guilt. All this time I had been judging white people, right? You got this privilege. You should be doing X, Y, and Z. And I realized in the moment, without someone opening my eyes, the exact same thing when I was in that position, right?
Wow.
So I always preach to people like, read Animal Farm, 2 legs good, 4 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Like once you're in that position, you do the same thing if you're demonizing the other side, right? And so after that experience, I have had a patience for white ignorance of white privilege on a whole nother level, because I realized that it's only by the grace of God that I was born Black, and I wasn't born in a system of privilege, right? And so I get the joy of having my eyes open. That's how I see it personally. Everybody doesn't see it that way, but
what's the difference from in favor and privilege? Anybody can answer that.
So I'll just say, I think when I think of privilege, I think it's something that you receive without any knowledge of it, and you don't even think of it, and you get to enjoy. You're enjoying benefits, right?
Is that what favor is?
No. So I think that no, because I think favor, to be, generally speaking, I think favor is something that is you have sort of knowledge of. There's a consciousness that's attached with favor that I don't think is always attached with privilege. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But yeah, I promised somebody that I was going to do something for them, so I have to jump off. But I think that this is great. I can't wait for the next one. Sharon, make sure you invite me to that.
I will, Carla K.
Thank you. I love you all. Appreciate you all.
Yes. Anybody else want to close? Harry, would you close with?
Yeah. I think I want to answer your question. I think that's a very good question. When you talk about favor and privilege, historically, when you look at privilege, privilege is something that you don't necessarily earn it. You don't deserve it. It's just given to you based off of the color of your skin.
Right.
Favor, on the other hand, as it pertains to believers, is something you gain by the grace of God. Do you deserve it? No. There's some similarities, but I think when you look at privilege and the abuse of power, this is totally separate. When you talk about favor, you deal with the love of God and how you use that advantage that you've been given. You know, and I think that the flip side of the coin is what do you do with that favor or that similarity?
Yes.
Let's turn the tides. If you have, that's the reason why I love this conversation, and I love my two white brothers, my two pale-faced brothers. I love you guys. You guys, man, have privilege. Empower others. Use your voice, use your privilege, use your favor. With privilege, you're going to be able to get into doors that I can't get into based upon the color of my skin. Privilege is based off that context of skin color. Favor deals more or less when you talk about with those things that pertain to God and believers. So while there's similarity in both of them, you guys can open doors with privilege that other people can't open, and use that power that is given to you for the right reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Howie or Jimmy, any closing remarks, or are you?
One thing that I keep coming back to on social media is with people who say stuff like, I don't see racism, does it still exist? Is that, or they'll come back with all lives matter, and I'll say to them,
I hate that. I need deliverance.
And I'll say to them, like, this is something we don't experience, so we're not the experts. We have to trust the experts. Those are the people who do it every single day, and listen to them and stand by them if we're going to heal as a country. It's almost something that just kind of I keep saying to people repeatedly is that we've got to trust them. We've got to listen to them and stand with them.
Mm-hmm.
Man, thank you for those words, Jimmy.
Yes.
I tell you, thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, in the
Yes.
past 2 weeks, as everything has been going on, it's just been surprising to me to find out how so many people that I've known for some of the many, 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 many years, how they really feel about things.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's made me want to get up on the soapbox and really just start saying, like, listen, you don't know. You have
Yes.
no idea.
Yes. We need
Yes.
you to say that, Howard.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's been very disturbing to see people's true self revealed.
Right. Right. I am so grateful for y'all having this hard conversation. Are you willing to come back?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I love
Absolutely.
having this conversation because it's so important. It's so important, and we can reach people one person at a time. We can reach them, and I've learned a lot from you guys tonight. I have, and so thank you so much. And
Harry, you said a very simple phrase, and I didn't get to write it down. It was something like teach one.
Yeah. Each one teach one.
Each one teach one.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because you have to start someplace.
yes,
If you take that one seed, that seed grows, and then it spreads. That's the reason why I appreciate you guys' honesty and candor. You're very powerful, but it starts. I think because there's so much trauma and hurt, but it starts with you guys, especially when you're a white male. Your voice will ring louder than any bell or any sound that you could even imagine. You're powerful. I think God has chosen you guys for this time. For this time. I honestly do believe that.
yes, yes. And do know you're welcome to come to Atlanta. You're welcome.
Yes.
You're welcome here, Jimmy.
out
Howard,
with
Yeah.
of course. So
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
you guys, and let's chat again.
Thank you so much for organizing this, Sharon.
Yes.
It was a really, really great experience, and
Yes,
I
thank you.
appreciate what everyone had to say. I really learned so much. Thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you. Love you
Thank
guys.
you guys.
Okay,
Love you
let's
guys.
hand bump. You can't touch. Let's bump. Come on. Love you guys.
Love you.
Love y'all.
Nice to meet you, Harry.
Nice
All
to
right.
meet
Nice to
you,
meet
Harry.
you too, Jimmy. Nice to meet
Wait
you,
a minute. Hold it. Let me take a picture of everybody. Wait. I'm the picture queen.
Howard.
Coming. Can we do that hand bump? Herbie? They love you.
Love
Cheers.
you.
Sharon.
Love you guys. Good to
Love
see
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
God bless you.
God bless you too.